for us, the Committee for the Release of Political Prisoners. Primarily, the committee is getting reconvened, rejuvenized with a new set of people. Apart from that, we have been planning on taking up a major campaign. Unfortunately, because of several untold reasons, we have not been able to take it forward the way we wanted to be. But we have been kind of discussing on three important aspects from the Committee for the Release of Political Prisoners. The three important slogans which we want to put forward before the people of the subcontinent are number one, release all political prisoners unconditionally. Number two, repeal all draconian laws, including AFSPA and UAPA. Remove all armed forces from the people's struggle area. These were the initial three slogans which we had decided a year before. But now, with the new developments, we believe that another slogan also should be incorporated. I mean, I'm just impromptu kind of thinking loudly. That is that, this whole decision to start this National Counter Terrorism Center. Now, this also has to be, we have to kind of initiate a mass movement to see to it that this National Counter Terrorism Center should not get implemented or should not get constituted along with this National Investigating Agency, another structure which is being formulated. Now, I want to start whatever I wanted to say with these important slogans, because one premise with which the Political Prisoners Committee has tried to understand the situation that is prevalent in the subcontinent is that we believe that repression is a necessity or a necessary condition for the Indian state to perpetuate itself, to reproduce itself. Given that premise that repression is a necessary condition to perpetuate the Indian state, to reproduce the Indian state in very many forms, in very many structures, we believe that if we map the evolution of various laws, whether it is in the Indian Penal Code or in the CRPP, we can see there is a steady implementation as well as an important aspect of the Indian state to see to it that certain laws are necessarily, persistently implemented. If at all there is any such kind of questions or protest from the side of the people, the masses of the people, then how to reinvent the same law in very many different ways and bring back the same law in some other name or some other label with much more draconian instruments as per the need of the circumstance. I mean, if we see from, let us say, before the constitution of the Indian state in 47, let's say from 42 onwards, we can see the Armed Forces Special Powers Act being implemented in the region of the Northeast in anticipation of the emerging struggles, the people's struggles for self-determination, especially the Manipur people, the Nagas, all of whom were demanding for a separate, they had declared themselves an independent nation, an independent country, even before the independence of 47 that was declared by the Indian state. So, in anticipation of seeing to it that these demands as well as the groundswell that had come up in realizing these demands in the form of major people's movements in these regions, how to control these movements, for that itself the Armed Forces Special Powers Act was implemented in the 40s. And from then onwards, if we see, I'll just read out, the Armed Forces Special Powers Ordinance imposed by the British colonial government in 1942 was provided with more venom in 1958, when the Government of India enacted the Armed Forces Special Powers Act in post-47 India. It extended to the whole state of Assam, Manipur, Meghalaya, Nagaland and Tripura and the Union Territories of Arunachal Pradesh and Mizoram. Later it was extended to Kashmir. And the Armed Forces Special Powers Act empowered the armed forces to kill anyone with impunity on mere suspicion that the person was going to commit certain offense. Now from then, if we see, the Preventive Detention Act of 1950 was copied verbatim in the Maintenance of Internal Security Act, that is MISA 1971, under which tens of thousands of people were imprisoned between 1970 and 73 in West Bengal alone, of which the overwhelming majority comprised the Naxalites. During and before the emergency, that is 1975 to 77, thousands of people, mostly Naxalites, were shot dead or made disappear. By the end of the emergency, MISA had become the most hated word, and hence the MISA was ipso facto copied into the National Security Act 1980. In fact, there is no end to such laws, draconian laws, which have both regional and subcontinental applications. The West Bengal Prevention of Violent Activities Act, Punjab Disturbed Areas Ordinance, the National Security Act 1980, Terrorism and Disruptive Activities Prevention Act 1985, Prevention of Terrorism Act, that is POTA in 2002, to end, I think, to 2003. Public Security Act in Kashmir and many other acts and ordinances were passed. So, one can see, I'm just reading it out to show the progression, the repetition, the replication of the same laws so as to ensure that as per the needs of the state. We tend to make this sometimes we tend to make this distinction. During the Nehruvian period it was much better. But perhaps if we see, astonishingly one can see all these acts are promulgated at that time, and that is also one of those moments in the history of the subcontinent where much bloodshed and state building had happened, where the Indian state was getting constituted through armed occupations in several areas, and at the same time by bringing in the police and the necessary security apparatus in several regions to ensure that the state was getting entrenched in very many ways. Now from then onwards, when we progress towards the 80s and let us say the 90s, when the liberalization, privatization, globalization policies are being implemented, there again one can see the laws being reinvented and being implemented with such ferocity, so much so that as and when the law brings in more and more people behind the bars, and when there is an outcry, one law, that is like the TADA, is getting repealed, or the pretension is being given that is TADA is being repealed, and then after that the same law is being brought in through POTA. And when POTA is becoming a hated word, you repeal it back and then you are bringing in Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. Unlawful Activities Prevention Act is again the creation in 1967, which has got added with more teeth in the recent times, and the picture becomes complete when we see the National Counter Terrorism Center, which gains its teeth and strength from the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and which becomes, which makes the picture complete in the sense that we are into a national security stage, a penal stage, wherein the IB has not only powers to go after people, investigate as they do secretly because they don't come under any statute. But now, through the UAPA, the sanction is given to the National Counter Terrorism Center as well as the IB to arrest, not only investigate, but also to execute as per its threat perception anyone whom they deem fit as committing offences that are not in the interest of the Indian state. And mind you, the definition of terrorism under UAPA is the most vaguest possible that has been kept, and so much so that anyone which the agencies think or the state thinks is fit enough to become a terrorist immediately gets arrested under this particular law or that particular law. And at the present juncture, if we notice that there is more and more investment from the so-called civil expenditure of the government into building up structures, like say for instance state-of-the-art prisons, then several nodal centers. Then apart from all this, we also hear that there are so many unknown expenditure to create a wartime kind of economy. Like by which what I am trying to say is that if we go to the northeast, like where in Naga areas, Manipur, or for that matter Kashmir, you have an emergency situation. An emergency situation in the sense the entire security apparatus, because there is a whole lot of impetus from the side of the government to build up the so-called security apparatus from the point of view of public safety. And here you create an emergency kind of situation where you have a whole lot of money being spent on these kind of institutions, structures, wherein you also have a huge industry thriving. You know, like if you go to the universities today, you will find in classrooms also closed-circuit TVs. What is the purpose of having closed-circuit TVs in classrooms? What is the purpose of having closed-circuit TVs in staff rooms? So the sense of security and security-based industry is also being built up in a big way. And here, like when I was talking about an emergency situation, the money is also being pumped in to create a buffer section. Like if you go to northeast or Kashmir, you can also see a huge buffer section being generated by this particular economy in terms of money being pumped into this section and they being the beneficiaries of such an emergency situation, where because of the prevalence of such a certain polarization in the society, a certain kind of money is being pumped into this reality, and that money gets consumed by a affluent middle class who also becomes the beneficiary of that wartime kind of situation in these areas. This also gets replicated in, let us say, North Telangana kind of regions, where the state also builds by bringing a certain kind of emergency kind of situation, by bringing in whole lot of security forces and developing what you call the informers economy. The informers economy, the kind of money that is being spent into creating a very efficient informer network. So this is part of what you call the securitized state. And this kind of, if you read through the papers nowadays, you know, these kind of discourses are also becoming a normal thing in the papers. And I mean, there is nobody to question why so much money should be spent on developing an informal network. there is nobody to kind of question as to why an emergency situation has to be deliberately created, generated in regions like the Kashmir, Northeast and all, where such security industry can survive. Now, from this particular premise, I would move a little forward to the role of the media. The role of the media becomes all the more incriminating in this kind of scenario, wherein before any particular person is tried before the court of law, the media indulges in the most insidious, insinuating trials, wherein the entire public opinion, the public consent is manufactured towards ensuring that a particular person, a particular detainee can be, the state can do whatever they would like, deeming fit, to see to it that these people are given the right treatment, this quote-unquote right treatment. So, from here, our campaign becomes important. That the 3-4 slogans that I have initially spelled out becomes important because for us, as we all know that when a particular political prisoner is detained, definitely we have to provide legal expertise, legal assistance for the detainees so as to ensure that their fundamental rights are protected, at least preserved. But beyond that, the Political Prisoners Committee's role becomes significant, important, from the point of view of generating a public opinion. And when I say this, I know fully well that it is not an easy task for us. And this generation of a public opinion against such a huge apparatus of the state, propaganda, state-owned media as well as the private-owned media all have similar interests. Like say for instance, mining interests, interest in building dams, or all kinds of loot policies pertaining to loot and plunder. But the media also has, a considerable section of the media also has similar interests, and there is a convergence of interest between what the state wants to do as part of perpetuation of the policies of liberalization, privatization and globalization, as well as what the media would want to generate as a profile that is desirable for the people of the subcontinent. Given that convergence, the campaign which the Political Prisoners Committee wants to do becomes difficult, challenging, and also it is no mean task. We have to generate massive public propaganda, public opinion. We have to create a mass agitation. We have to create a mass movement. We have to create counter profiles. Why is it that a Muslim can always be a traitor? We have to create a counter profile against that such deliberate, considered propaganda from the side of the state. Why is it that the Kashmiri Muslim becomes a terrorist and cannot be believed? Why is it that the Nagas are, people who can be given secondary status? Why is it that the Maoists should not be given justice? Or why is it that are the Maoists terrorists? This kind of a deliberate profile created by the media and a fear being created among the people not to speak up. We have to break that silence. And breaking that silence needs coming out, telling what exactly is happening, and also bringing before the large sections of the people as to what is that being, what does it mean that, like when the tribals in Bastar, when they are standing against a massive ganging up of the state and the corporate sector and the imperialists, what does it mean for the everyday life of the people there. What does it mean when they are talking about a new world? What does it mean when they are talking about taking their own future in their hands? Now, that is precisely where the whole question of justice, the whole question of having control over one's own life, and the whole question of a justice based on self-reliance becomes important. And herein also comes the converging point of Committee for the Release of Political Prisoners. Primarily from the point of view of creating a public opinion, primarily from the point of view of creating a mass movement of all sections of the people to see to it that this kind of a consensus the state wants to create desperately to somehow wriggle out of a crisis which it itself has created. The present economic crisis that is looming large in the subcontinent, which has its origin from the imperialist countries. That particular crisis is hitting the Indian economy also, the subcontinent economy also severely. And if we notice all the so-called showcase economy of the present government, whether it is the growth economy based on purchase of cars, or whether it is the real estate economy, or for that matter the mining sector and other core industries, all are in terrible slum. And this particular slum also has created further desperation within the ruling classes. And precisely because of that, the National Counter Terrorism Center, the National Investigating Agency, UAPA, AFSPA, all becomes important for the state also, because without all these aspects, without all these ideologies of exploitation, the state cannot perpetuate itself. So I would conclude my speech here. I once again exhort all the participants here to move ahead with these slogans in the future days to build up a coherent and consistent movement for ensuring the release of the political prisoners unconditionally. And I also thank the AP chapter for inviting me for this meeting. Thank you.